In this current attention economy, with the sheer deluge of content vying for your time, it can be difficult to commit to any one thing or to find those smaller or more niche titles that could become your new favorite. In that regard, it has become increasingly important for those self-loathing enough to subject themselves to the full content stream to be able to meaningfully report back on what treasures they find amongst the muck. Now, on that front, I don't think there's exactly a hole in the market for people combing the current season, but with the tilled fields of the backlog abandoned and needing some desperate TLC, I figured that's where I can come in. Using a random anime generator to keep things interesting and to maximize my own suffering, I've selected 3 shows from seasons past that'll give 3 episodes to catch my attention and to see if the juice is worth the squeeze. If so, I'll bring them home and we can see if my initial evaluations were well founded. I'm basically a recommendation AI, but not a clanker, and my reports come months later than they were due. At least I'm usually not pulling information out of my ass. In our current dystopia, you've gotta take what you can get.
It was Saturday night. Eclipse was beginning. 重ね合う刹那を北へ4と信じ
In a world where I can find a plethora of video essays and articles describing the death of preteen culture, I find it quite rewarding to look back on this era of one's own life and analyze the kinds of things you would have thought was the shit. I remember watching a Akame ga Kill a few years back and remarking how that show would have probably done wonders for a younger version of myself. And I'd be lying if I didn't say that there's a certain caliber of 2010s era edge porn that fascinates me still. I mean, you know what I'm talking about. The I'm 14 and this is deep show that you watch to approximate what you think maturity is, all the while being full of some of the just plain worst writing imaginable that holds up to zero scrutiny. 2018's Devil Line is one such show, coming out at a time that I can only retroactively say was full of things trying to be the next Tokyo Ghoul, all except Tokyo Ghoul itself, which was trying to completely run itself into the ground. The show follows college student Tsukasa Taira. Tsukasa is just your typical every girl until one day an encounter with a demonic stalker goes south. Facing death, Tsukasa is saved by the half-devil, half-human hybrid Yuki Anzai, who's employed by the local police department to help combat the rise of devils in the city. Because this is one of those stories, Tsukasa ends up falling for Yuki, and thus the story follows as she's roped into the world of the city's demonic underbelly. I do like to walk into everything and give it a fair shake, but Devil's Line is one of those shows that really wants me to hate it. We do get a pretty decent opening sequence with no dialogue and some okay color choices, but it's pretty much all downhill from there. Anime writers can't help themselves with their generic protagonists, and Tsukasa can join the heap, while the dialogue and visuals are stiff enough to only ever work in the context of a low-budget YA work. See, this is a dark and mature story, and you know that because people die and there's rape. After all, there is nothing more gritty and real than trivializing a traumatic incident for shock value, and that's about what you'll get with Devil's Line. The whole thing is frankly ugly to look at with awful lighting and color direction, whilst the animation and designs are also both just so boring as to barely leave an impression. Conceptually, the idea of a half-vampire, half-human hybrid fighting off other vampires is simple enough to work with the right writing, but we just don't get that here, and instead get a confused mess of a story whose attempts at shock value also just fall completely flat. It's the type of story that throws something like gore or sexual assault at you and says, "Oh gee, isn't this shocking?" but does so in a way that undermines its own point and feels cheap and lazy in the process. Ultimately, Devil's Line feels like something that you'd only ever watch to laugh at, not with, but even on that front, its biggest crime is yet to only do all of that half-assed. It's a piece of schlock from a bygone era that I'm glad is firmly behind us. Please, let's just keep it there. In 2005, the Japanese idol industry was set to change in a major way. After a fairly subdued presence across the 90s, the industry was seeing a mild resurgence after the debut of the group Morning Musume in 1997. Hopping onto that train, in July of 2005, a man by the name of Yasushi Akamoto would hold an audition for his new theater-based idol group that would come to be known as AKB48 and would set the idol world on fire. In a different part of Tokyo, though, something else was also brewing. That same month, video game publisher Namco would release to arcades a new game with a similar premise titled The Idolmaster. Spearheaded by designer Akihiro Ishihara, the game was designed as a racing sim that would encourage players to keep coming back day after day, using new magnetic stripe cards that enabled players to save progress between sessions. Ishihara was looking to target the arcade's predominantly male audience with a game that allowed you to raise and grow emotionally attached to a variety of girls and young women, and after playing around with a few other concepts, settled on idols to be the main set dressing. The game would be a massive success for the soon-to-be merged Bandai Namco, and would spawn a massive franchise that continues to this day. With success comes copycats though, and other publishers looking to tap into that market would soon follow suit. Released in 2019, Ensemble Stars is a David production adaptation of the game by the same name. The game originally launched in 2015 as a spin-off to the 2012 idol raising game Ensemble Girls, only this time featuring male idols. Stars would end up quickly eclipsing the success of its predecessor, eventually leading it to branch out into other mediums. Our story follows player character stand-in Anzu, who was enrolled in the recently opened production course of the famed male idol incubator school Yumenosaki Academy. Once there, she quickly befriends an up-and-coming idol unit called Trickstar, consisting of the quartet of Subaraka Hoshi, Hokuto Hidaka, Makoto Yuki, and Mao Isara. She also learns that in this school, the student council rules with an iron fist, perpetuating a caste system which keeps anyone not of means from rising up the ranks to become pros. Members of Trickstar, not content with the hand they've been dealt, vow to overthrow the student council through the power of their music and change the system to benefit everyone instead of a connected few. I know I've talked about at least one other male idol show before, and I think until I eventually try out Idolish 7, my point still kind of stands that I am just not the target demo for these kinds of shows. Though, with that being said, Ensemble Stars wasn't half bad. I don't think Daypro is exactly the best studio on the scene right now, but they certainly are, at the very least, competent, leaving the show with a pretty solid production. The designs are kind of weak, but the animation is able to elevate itself to a decent enough degree when it needs to. The performances do use CG, but that does allow them to add a lot more camera movement to spice things up, and it's not terrible CG for the time and talent here. The plot is also kind of deranged. Like, there's a flat-out brawl in the very first episode, and the comedic timing and character writing are at least decent enough to not just feel like the dating sim that I think we all knew these kinds of games basically are. It's definitely got enough money and talent thrown at it to not be terrible. It does offer a fairly engaging experience, all things considered. Where it ends up falling short is kind of what kills a lot of these shows. Male or female, the cast just kind of blows. They do a decent enough job making the school not just feel like a grocery store of husbandos, but even if everyone isn't hot, the size of the cast means that everyone here kind of just boils down to one or two cliche character traits, all without striking enough designs to make their identity stick. I feel like I should give Anzu a little slack, since she is literally just a plot device needed to convert the game into a TV series, but she still leaves little in the way of an impression, such that I just don't care about anything she does. Like, I know it was kind of a different show, but at least heroines run the show made the female lead interesting. And beyond that, everything here kind of falls into that trap of just being competent and not exactly great, leading to something that does feel watchable, but not anything that's going to blow you away in the process, which for two cores seems bound to get old a little quickly. I've watched better, I've watched worse. I don't know, flip a coin, see what it says. One thing that kind of drives me up the wall is how little so many shows actually have to say. Like, coming from other mediums, it feels like a given that a story should build to some kind of deeper themes or takeaways or something. And then anime most of the time is like, yeah, we're not gonna do that. I mean, it's fine to a point, sure, and some genres get away with it more than others, but I hate MacGuffin plots that don't have the self-awareness to realize that the goal should never have been to defeat the Demon Lord. Like, we are so beyond the basics of writing 101 that I'm half tempted to give a pass to anything with at least the smallest thread of something it wants to say. On that note, y'all ever play BioShock? I mean, I haven't, but I imagine if you took that game and made it into a light novel fantasy anime and then kind of made it a lot worse, you'd get 2023's The Kingdoms of Ruin. Our story takes place in a universe where witches are real, and many centuries ago they made a pact with God to protect humanity from the horrors of the world. The only problem is that humanity is the jealous sort, and eventually, fearing their protectors as captors, outnumbered and mercilessly hunted them to extinction. This included a witch named Chloe, who was publicly executed by the Redia Empire after their king power tripped and convinced himself that with the kingdom's new technology, the humans didn't need the witches at all. The one problem with this plan is that Chloe had a human apprentice named Adonis, who years later breaks out of his holding cell and vows revenge on the world for killing his mentor right before his eyes. Actually, now that I think about it, that sounds nothing like BioShock. I remember this getting a little buzz back when it aired for just how gratuitously brutal its first episode was, and honestly, that's not an unfair call. The world is gritty and dark, and the series absolutely leans into that with some light themes of the hubris of man and science versus divine will that underpin its narrative. There are decent bones for a compelling story with the right guys working on it, who can handle this narrative with adequate maturity. Alternatively, you can kind of just go the inverse and make it a sort of campy mess with loose themes that also kind of works in the right hands. Unfortunately, all of this production is left hands, a plot that falls apart fairly quickly. Not instantaneously, mind you, so that's a start. But as more characters eventually open their mouths, things get worse quickly. You're gonna have to get behind just maniacally evil villains, but then they really want to salt the wound by having Chloe not just killed, but also sexually harassed and abused beforehand, like just in case you thought maybe her killers were in the right. It's this degree of sloppy and lazy writing that permeates the whole show. Adonis is just your typical spurned edgelord with a ton of power, in a setting that half tries to mix fantasy and sci-fi in a way I've only ever really seen the Raildex franchise pull off. Beyond that, the show also feels really up its own ass. I can kind of deal with the comic book villain writing if you play up your theatrics and just run with it. But instead, the Kingdoms of Ruin feels like a middle schooler read the Wikipedia page on nihilism and had this epiphany that they finally figured out the world and its secrets. The exposition is often almost preachy, which doesn't pair well with the sledgehammer that is Adonis running around and making a mess of things. There's like mechs and military men and a whole lot of blood, so it's basically just a 14-year-old's wet dream, with a lot that just feels like it's trying to rule of cool its way to some kind of relevance. Honestly, it feels ripped right out of the mid-2010s and some of the wild dumpster fires that time period produced, and yet still not anywhere close to as interesting. Get this out of my face, would you kindly? Devil's Line didn't quite tank as quickly as I thought it would, but it did eventually do just that, and with it found a new home on the draft list. I'm never one to too harshly criticize amateur mistakes, but when you do so in a bitter and cynical way with terrible dialogue and boring execution on a professional production, I'm a little less lenient. Some things are better left in the past. Ensemble Stars could have gone any which way, given the idol-raising genre isn't exactly known for being the best written, and seems to have mostly fallen off these days. Still, it is fairly entertaining and brisk with its plot that it's mostly able to hold your attention. Unfortunately, I can't say the same about the character writing, which is about on brand for the genre, and without that attachment, I did have to make the tough call to not renew its contract. You can chalk it up to personal preference, since I think if you are more attuned to this genre and its tropes, it doesn't seem like bad background noise. But I've got enough of that on my plate, so I don't really need any more. The Kingdoms of Ruin continues the brave tradition of being edgy teenage bait, proving that maybe Devil's Line's genre isn't fully dead and buried. I really did want to give it the benefit of the doubt and find literally any reason to continue. While it did have some interesting ideas buried in its concept, between the brute force dialogue and delivery of said idea and the subpar production, I couldn't muster any more than the mandatory 3 episodes. There's definitely a market for this given that they keep churning out shows like it, but I'm not it, and I'd rather spend my time looking for a show where I almost certainly am. With that, we reach the end of yet another video. I hope you enjoyed and that I could help narrowing down your planning list. If you like what you saw, remember to like and subscribe, then head down below and let me know your thoughts on the series discussed here today. You can also head over to the playlist and check out the other videos in this series that you might have missed. I am committed to try to get myself back on schedule with these uploads, so you're not going to want to miss those as they come out, as well as any other projects I might release down the line. You can also give me a follow on these sites here for more content and anime recs, and until next time, remember to stay salty.